The summer air hung thick and heavy over the dusty auction yard, humming with the restless energy of animals and men alike. Flies buzzed lazily in the sun, circling sweat-slicked necks and twitching ears. Horses snorted and stamped, their hooves clattering against wooden planks as buyers drifted between pens with sharp eyes and folded arms. Somewhere a child laughed, chasing a dog that wasn't his. Somewhere a deal was struck with a spit and a nod. But over by the far pen, away from the crowds and the noise, stood a horse no one approached. His coat was dull, a matted brown streaked with dried mud and scabs. His left hind leg trembled under the weight of a swollen mass just above the fetlock, a tumor unmistakably grotesque, its edges raw from brushing too often against the pen. The horse stood still, as though motion itself had betrayed him long ago. His ribs pressed visibly against his sides, every breath shallow and careful. He wasn't old, not yet, but suffering had carved a kind of age into his frame that time alone could not. A boy stopped briefly, pointed, and whispered, "Is that thing dying?" His father pulled him away, without a word. Up on the platform, the auctioneer adjusted his hat and glanced toward the pen with visible annoyance. "All right, folks, up next we got a special kind of deal. Real fixer-upper, if you ask me." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. No one stepped forward. The auctioneer rolled his shoulders and forced a grin. "Come on now. He's still got 4 legs. Mostly. Let's start the bidding at 50. Who'll give me 50? Silence. In the back, beneath the shadow of the viewing shed, a man leaned against the post with his arms crossed. He hadn't come to bid. He hadn't come for anything, really. Just an old habit, one he hadn't shaken in years. His name was Thomas, and everything about him was quiet. The way he stood, the way his eyes moved, the way he seemed to breathe slower than everyone else. His jeans were worn, patched at the knees. His flannel shirt was clean but faded. A silver ring hung from a chain around his neck, worn to a dull sheen from too much touching. He watched the horse, not with pity, but recognition. The kind you have when you see something that reflects what you feel and dare not say. "All right," the auctioneer said, clearly irritated now. 20. Someone give me $20, and he's yours." The horse shifted slightly, the tumor pulling at the skin like it hurt just to breathe. His eyes scanned the crowd, slow, uncertain, distant. No takers. Thomas stepped forward. Not hurriedly, not theatrically. He walked like a man who knew he couldn't change the world, but maybe he could change one thing in it. His boots crunched against gravel as he approached the auction stand. The auctioneer squinted at him. "You serious?" Thomas nodded once. "I'll take him." Someone snorted. Another voice muttered, "Waste of money." Thomas didn't look at them. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a worn billfold, and counted out 2 tens. The auctioneer hesitated, then took the bills with a shrug. "He's yours, then," he said, already turning to the next lot. Thomas crossed the yard slowly. As he neared the pen, the horse raised its head just enough to watch him. It didn't flinch, didn't step back, just stared, as though waiting for pain. Thomas opened the latch and stepped inside. He moved with care, hands open, posture unthreatening. He stopped a few feet away and crouched. "Easy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." The horse didn't respond. He waited. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the smells of manure, hay, and diesel fuel. Somewhere, a bell rang to signal the next sale. Thomas extended his hand slowly, palm down. The horse blinked once then, hesitantly, lowered his head a few inches. His muzzle brushed the edge of Thomas's fingers. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. Thomas swallowed, throat tightening as he gently touched the animal's neck. Beneath the coarse hair, he could feel the tension, the thinness of muscle, the slight tremor of fear. "I know," he said softly. "I know what it's like." He didn't mean just the limp, or the tumor, or the hollow hunger. He meant being discarded, being too broken for people to want anymore. As Thomas led the horse out of the pen, several onlookers turned away, already forgetting what they'd seen. But a girl by the fence watched them pass with wide eyes, clutching her mother's hand. "Why'd he take that horse?" she asked. The mother glanced at Thomas and frowned. "Some people have to learn the hard way," But Thomas didn't hear her. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. He walked slowly, allowing the horse to hobble at his side, every step uneven, every breath labored. But the animal followed. Not out of trust, not yet, but because there was no one else. He led him past the trailers and the barns, down a dirt path that wound away from the auction yard and toward a faded blue truck parked under an elm tree. The trailer hitched behind it was rusted and crooked, its ramp stuck halfway down. Thomas paused and looked at it. So did the horse. "I guess we're both a little busted," he said, half to himself. It took coaxing, gentle encouragement, and a few minutes of quiet waiting, but eventually the horse stepped onto the ramp. The wood creaked. He stopped halfway, uncertain. Thomas stood beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We go forward," he murmured. "That's what we do now." The horse stepped in. Thomas shut the ramp gently behind him. The sound echoed like a door closing on something final. He stood beside the truck for a moment, fingers resting on the latch. A breeze stirred the leaves above, and the shadows danced across the dirt. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. A message from his sister blinked on the screen. Asterisk, "You coming for dinner tonight? Been a while." Asterisk. He stared at it, then locked the phone and slipped it away. Inside the trailer, the horse shifted his weight, the boards groaning beneath him. Thomas took the wheel and started the engine. As the truck pulled away from the auction yard, dust rose behind it, curling into the air like memory. And in that battered trailer, beneath the weight of pain and silence, 2 wounded lives had just begun to share a single, fragile hope. The road to Thomas's farm wound through miles of parched countryside, where broken fences leaned like weary shoulders, and grass grew in brittle clumps. The sun had begun to dip low, casting long, bruised shadows across the land. Inside the trailer, the horse shifted with each bump and dip, letting out the occasional grunt, but never a cry. Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror, more out of habit than necessity. He could feel the animal's presence, like a weight in his chest. His farm sat at the edge of a forgotten ridge, a stretch of earth few people passed through unless they had a reason. The mailbox was rusted, its red flag long broken. The wooden gate hung crooked on one hinge. He stopped the truck beside the barn, what remained of it, and climbed out slowly, joints stiff. Years of solitude had slowed his limbs, but never his resolve. He lowered the trailer ramp carefully, stepping up and speaking in that same quiet tone. "All right, boy. This is home now." The horse hesitated. The inside of the trailer, though grim, had been familiar for the last few hours. Outside, the air held strange smells: hay, oil, damp wood, and distant pine. A dog barked from somewhere far off. Still, after a long pause, the horse descended, one trembling hoof at a time, until he stood on the gravel, his breathing shallow and rapid. Thomas led him across the yard with a loose rope in one hand. He didn't tug or hurry. He let the animal find his own pace, slow and uneven. When they reached the open stall, recently cleaned, lined with fresh straw, Thomas stepped aside, letting him walk in on his own. The horse stood just inside the threshold, looking uncertain. Then, as though surrendering to the weight in his legs, he lay down. Not collapsed, just folded himself carefully into the straw, his bad legs stretched outward, away from pressure. Thomas knelt beside him and reached for the water bucket he'd left in the corner. The horse sniffed it and drank slowly, a few sips at a time. When he finished, he lowered his head to the straw and closed his eyes. Thomas stayed there for a while, his back resting against the wooden post, saying nothing. The next morning began with silence. No roosters, no machines, just the soft rustle of wind through the barn and the sound of the horse breathing. Thomas entered quietly, holding a bucket of mash softened with warm water. The horse opened one eye, then the other, watching as the man placed the bucket nearby. He ate, slowly, tentatively, but he ate. Thomas crouched beside him, watching the way the animal's body tensed every time the leg shifted. The tumor was worse up close, hot to the touch, the skin stretched and red. Infection was likely, possibly systemic. Thomas knew what most people would say: put the animal down. Don't waste time or money. But Thomas had buried too many things to let this one go without trying. Later that day, He rummaged through a forgotten storage cabinet in the barn and found what supplies he could. Old bandages, alcohol, a faded bottle of penicillin. The label was worn off, but he remembered the dosage. Muscle memory hadn't betrayed him yet. He sterilized a syringe, filled it carefully, and returned to the stall. The horse tensed when he saw the needle. Thomas slowed, showing the syringe in the open like a promise. "I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured. "This'll help." He waited a full minute before moving closer. The injection was quick. The horse shuddered but didn't fight. Over the next few days, the routine formed without words. Morning, feed, clean, check the wound. Noon, walk, just a few steps outside, always on soft ground. Evening, more mash, quiet sitting, occasional brushing if the horse allowed it. The horse didn't yet have a name. Thomas wasn't sure if naming him felt right. But each day, as trust grew in quiet, invisible lines, he began whispering one word to himself. Chance. It started as a thought, then a whisper, then a habit. He'd murmur it when brushing the coat, when wrapping the leg, when watching him sleep. Chance. One afternoon, while cleaning out the old tack room, Thomas found a photo tucked inside a weathered book. It showed a younger man, him, beside a chestnut mare, and a woman smiling just off to the side. Her eyes held something soft, almost mischievous. In her hands, she held a bridle wrapped in pink ribbon. Thomas ran a thumb across her face. That mare had been theirs. Her name had been Lily. She died during foaling, and their daughter, Anna, never rode again. Neither did his wife. Some losses pull you under quietly, like a tide you never saw coming. The tumor began to shrink, not dramatically, but noticeably. The swelling eased, and Chance no longer flinched when lying down. His appetite improved. His eyes, once dull and cloudy, began to sharpen. On the 5th day, he nickered when Thomas entered the stall, soft, uncertain, but real. That sound caught Thomas off guard. He stopped, blinked, and let out the smallest smile. "You talk now, do you?" Chance stepped forward, gingerly, placing more weight on the leg than before. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't easy, but it was better. By the 2nd week, they began short walks through the field beyond the barn. The fence was broken in several places, but the pasture still held life. Yellow flowers blooming low among the grass, patches of clover clinging to earth, hardened by neglect. Thomas walked beside Chance with no rope, no saddle, no lead. Just quiet footsteps, side by side. They didn't speak, but something passed between them, an unspoken agreement stitched together from pain and patience. One evening, after brushing Chance's coat beneath the porch light, Thomas found himself lingering. He placed a hand on the horse's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of breath beneath his palm. "You're not just healing," he whispered. "You're helping me remember how." Chance didn't move away. As the last light faded behind the trees, a faint wind rolled through the fields, carrying the scent of coming rain. Thomas looked up, eyes squinting into the sky. Tomorrow would be hard. The wound still needed tending. There were more days of limping, more risk of infection. He knew that. But the silence that had once filled the farm with sorrow now held something different. Not joy, not yet, but hope. And it was enough to keep going. A week later, the rain finally came. Not the kind that darkens the earth gently, but a cold, unrelenting downpour that turned the yard into sludge and pounded against the tin roof of the barn like it held a grudge. Thomas stood just inside the doorway, watching as water streamed off the gutters and pooled beneath the steps. Chance stood in his stall, chewing slowly, his eyes following the movement of the storm. The horse no longer flinched when Thomas approached. He no longer backed away from the brush or the bucket or the careful hand wrapping his leg. The tumor had shrunk further, its edges less inflamed, but healing was slow and uneven. There were days Chance stood without trembling, and others when pain returned with quiet cruelty. Still he moved. Still he tried. That morning, Thomas made a call he had been avoiding. Dr. Ramirez arrived just after noon, her truck sending waves of mud in every direction as it crawled up the path. She stepped out in a raincoat, hair tucked into a hood, and approached the barn with practiced ease. Her gaze was sharp, but not unkind. "You still have that old trailer out there?" she asked. brushing water off her sleeves. "Just barely," Thomas replied. He led her to Chance's stall. She paused in the doorway, taking in the horse's frame, the leg, the way Chance lifted his head slowly to regard her. "This him?" Thomas nodded. "Bought him at the auction." She crouched beside the horse, examining the leg with gloved hands, pressing along the edge of the tumor, watching the way Chance's muscles twitched under pressure. "He's let you do this?" she asked, surprised. "Not at first, but he's come around." Dr. Ramirez rose to her feet and removed her gloves. "It's still bad. The tumor's embedded deep, and if it spreads any further, it'll affect the bone. I'm honestly shocked he's still standing. He's tougher than he looks." She studied Thomas for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. "There's a chance we can remove it, but the surgery would be rough, and the recovery even harder. I won't sugarcoat it. He might not make it through. He's got fight in him, but it's not just about that. His heart, lungs, immune system, all of it's been through hell." Thomas leaned against the post, arms crossed. He said nothing. "I'm not saying don't try," she added. "But if you do, be sure you're ready to lose him." Thomas's eyes never left the horse. "I've lost enough," he said. "This time I'd like to fight." That evening, the rain eased, and the barn grew quiet again. Thomas filled the stall with fresh hay, laid out clean towels, and wiped down every surface within reach. He wasn't sure if any of it mattered, but it made him feel ready. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Dr. Ramirez arrived early, this time with her assistant, a silent young man who barely spoke, but moved with careful efficiency. The procedure would be done right there in the barn. Transporting Chance could worsen the damage. Thomas stood by with steady hands, offering what help he could. He held the 4-bag. He whispered to Chance until the sedative pulled him down slowly, his large frame sinking into the bed of straw. The tools were laid out on a clean cloth. A scalpel, clamps, syringes. Everything gleamed cold beneath the single overhead bulb. Dr. Ramirez worked quickly. She made the incision with practiced hands, slicing through layers of tissue to expose the tumor. Thomas couldn't look away, though every second was agony. Chance flinched under anesthesia as pressure triggered nerves. The assistant held him still. Thomas steadied his breathing, watching blood seep into the straw. A minute stretched into 10, 10 into 20. Then something went wrong. A vein ruptured. Blood welled faster than expected. Dr. Ramirez swore softly, her fingers moving rapidly to clamp the site. The assistant's hands trembled. Thomas took a step forward. "What can I do?" "Pressure here," she snapped, pointing to a spot above the incision. He moved into place, applying weight with trembling hands, feeling the heat of life just beneath the surface. The seconds crawled by. The bleeding slowed. The tumor, finally freed, was lifted and dropped into a metal tray with a dull thud. Dr. Ramirez stitched quickly, sweat lining her brow despite the cold. When it was over, they stood back, exhausted. "He'll need time," she said, voice raw. "We all will." Chance lay motionless for what felt like forever. But then his ear twitched. His chest rose and fell, steady. Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. They monitored him for hours. Thomas didn't leave the stall. He dozed in the corner, head resting against the post, waking at every sigh and stir. By nightfall, Chance stirred fully. He didn't stand, not yet, but he looked at Thomas, clear-eyed, awake. The worst was over, but the road ahead was still long. In the days that followed, Chance remained in recovery. He couldn't put weight on the leg yet, and the stitches needed daily care. But he ate well. He responded to Thomas's voice. And most importantly, he endured. Dr. Ramirez returned on the 3rd day to check the incision. She whistled low when she saw it. "I didn't think he'd make it through," she admitted. "He proved me wrong." Thomas offered a faint smile. "He's good at that." "You ever think about giving him a name?" "I have," he said, glancing toward the stall. "Chance." She nodded. "Fits." That evening, while feeding Chance under a sky washed clean by the storm, Thomas sat in the dirt beside the stall, watching the horse as he chewed quietly. There were no miracles here. No dramatic transformation. The tumor was gone, yes, but the limp remained, and the future still loomed uncertain. But in that quiet, something had shifted. Chance no longer looked like a broken thing waiting for mercy. He looked like something surviving, day by day, scar by scar. Thomas leaned his head back against the stall and closed his eyes. They had survived something together, and now they would learn, one step at a time, how to live. Morning broke over the ridge in quiet gold, brushing the tops of the trees with light as soft as breath. Mist clung to the pasture, and the old fence, still mended in places with wire and willpower, stood just tall enough to keep the world out. Chance stepped carefully along the dewy ground, his gait still uneven, but steadier than it had ever been. Thomas watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand. He had risen early, as always, but today carried something different in its bones. A small flyer sat folded beside him, an invitation to a community horse parade scheduled for next weekend. Open participation, no restrictions. Riders of all ages, even those who had been out of the saddle for years. He hadn't gone to town in months, maybe more. The idea of showing up, much less entering, made his stomach twist. But something about it tugged at him, persistent and quiet, like a child nudging his coat sleeve. He looked up as Chance limped across the pasture, stopping every few steps to sniff a cluster of wildflowers. Not graceful, not quick, but alive. Later that afternoon, he opened the barn and dusted off his wife's old saddle. It was cracked at the seams, the leather dry in places, but the silver buckles still caught the light. He ran his fingers along the stitching, remembering the way she used to hum while brushing down their mare Lily. She'd always insisted a horse didn't need to be perfect to be proud, just willing. He brought the saddle out and let Chance sniff it. The horse's ears twitched, not in fear, but curiosity. Thomas moved slowly, careful not to disturb the healing leg, as he set the saddle across his back. No bridle yet, just soft rope and voice. The first step was hesitant. So was the second. But Chance didn't bolt. He didn't tremble. He carried the weight like it was familiar, even if faint in memory. Each day, Thomas practiced. Not training in the traditional sense. No pressure, no force. Just movement, presence, trust. They circled the yard, then the pasture. Chance stumbled more than once, and Thomas never scolded him for it. He simply dismounted, gave him time, then tried again. By the fifth day, they had a rhythm. Imperfect, yes, but honest. On the morning of the parade, Thomas hesitated by the truck. The trailer had been patched, tires replaced. He'd even scrubbed the rust from the hitch. But still he wavered. He looked at Chance, already saddled, the scar on his leg barely visible now beneath the light wrap. The horse stepped forward, unprompted, stopping by the ramp. Thomas let out a slow breath. "All right then," he said. "Let's go show them what second chances look like." The drive into town was quiet. The streets were already lined with parked trucks and wagons. Children clutched flags and sticks of cotton candy. Riders mounted shiny horses, with polished hooves and braided manes. Everything glinted, too clean, too proud. He parked at the far end, away from the crowd, and lowered the trailer ramp. Chance stepped out slowly. Heads turned. Conversations paused. "That him?" someone whispered. "That's the one from the auction, right?" Thomas didn't meet their eyes. He adjusted the saddle, brushed dust from Chance's flank, and climbed up carefully. The procession began with a marching band. Then came trick riders, show ponies, girls in glittering hats. Cheers rose like smoke from the crowd. Then, toward the end of the line, Thomas and Chance stepped forward. They didn't trot. They didn't gallop. They walked. But the crowd fell into a hush. People leaned in. Eyes followed the scarred leg, the uneven steps, the way Chance carried himself, not broken, not ashamed, just whole in a different way. A child reached out from the edge of the crowd. Chance stopped. Thomas didn't pull the reins. The horse lowered his head, letting the child's fingers brush his muzzle. A smile spread across the boy's face. And then the crowd applauded. Not loud, not wild, but real. Soft clapping at first, then louder, growing as people rose to their feet. Someone shouted, "That's the horse with the tumor." Another yelled back, "Not anymore." Thomas swallowed hard, his hand resting on Chance's neck. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The warmth in his chest said enough. They finished the parade route slowly, without fanfare. But long after the band stopped playing, people still talked about them. About the old man and the limping horse. About what it meant to show up when you weren't expected to. When you weren't supposed to. Afterward, Thomas unsaddled Chance by the trailer, wiping him down with a damp cloth. He heard footsteps and turned to see Dr. Ramirez approaching. She looked at the horse, then at Thomas. He made it. He did, Thomas said quietly. She studied Chance for a moment longer, then added, "And so did you." He nodded, eyes drifting toward the fading sky. Driving home, the road seemed shorter. The wind was cooler. And when they reached the farm, Chance stepped out of the trailer with confidence in his stride. Thomas let him loose in the pasture. The horse didn't gallop, but he didn't limp either. He moved at his own pace, head high, tail flicking in the breeze, free. Thomas leaned against the fence, arms folded. A breeze rustled the trees behind him, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out across the valley. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his sister. Asterisk saw the parade photos. "You look good. Proud of you." Asterisk. He smiled softly. He looked at Chance, now grazing by the old willow tree. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't ache. It settled. It healed. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.